what a great start to the day. We were excited to be back, and the day was beautiful. It was just this great fall day, and we were in admin meeting. Me, Ken Dandorf, Pat Reedy, and Jim Keenan.
It was the beginning of the school day, of course, and all of us were still filled with the excitement of the first week of school. Still greeting students after not seeing them for 3 months, connecting with our colleagues.
I think about that day. There was all of that excitement of the beginning of the new school year. It was the second day of classes, and it was a beautiful day.
The second day of my second year here at St. Peter's Prep.
The second class day of my junior year here at Prep, and I was actually right here in this room. Back then it was B216, and it was a beautiful day outside these windows behind me.
Coaching, we used to just laugh and call days the top 10. It's the top 10 weather day, and that certainly was one. It was clear and unusually warm.
That these trees were not grown in yet. They had been planted just the summer before, and the Jersey City skyline hadn't grown in yet either, as it is today. So out the window would be the PREP letters of the Prep gym. Over the top of the barn was a pretty sweeping view of New York City and the World Trade Center towers.
I remember sitting in my English class with Father Hogue, and then someone noticed out the window that one of the towers was in flames.
The first I heard of 9/11 was a PA announcement. The students were looking at me for answers, and I had none, just like most of the world.
The windows of Burke Hall were quite low, right? They only came up to about here. I would see probably the middle third of the World Trade Center towers from my seat, which was right over there by the door. And so I was actually looking at the World Trade Center towers when both planes hit them, but I had no idea what was going on. And this is a fascinating story about being too close to something.
Once the school day was really in motion, the word spread pretty quickly that the World Trade Center had been hit by a plane.
Arvind Saw, who was on the operations staff, said to me, a plane crashed into the World Trade Center. It's crazy.
I wasn't sure what that meant, but there was something inside of me that said, this is not a good day.
And as I was walking down the steps of the English building, one of my colleagues with a camera in his hand was running by saying, I'm going down to the waterfront to take some photos because we just heard on the news that an amateur pilot flew into the World Trade Center.
And we kind of rushed to the windows, looked at what was happening, and didn't really understand what was going on.
We thought it was similar to what happened in 1945, when under very different conditions, foggy conditions, a military plane had hit the Empire State Building. But we thought it could have been a commercial plane. We really didn't know.
Through the door right next to me burst Bob Zawistowski, biology teacher. His classroom was directly above. And from his windows, he saw a little bit more clearly what was going on. But in such a grievous moment, such a terrible moment, words don't always make a lot of sense. So he came in and he said, does anybody have a camera? 2 planes just hit the World Trade Center. 2 planes just hit the World Trade Center. I'm sitting here trying to figure out what that even means.
I thought about that and I said, how could a plane crash into the World Trade Center?
There was word that a plane hit, and in all honesty, there was no sense, right, what that meant at that point. I remember calling my mother, and I remember saying to her, Mom, this is nothing to worry about. It's a little plane, it's an accident. These things happen, right? What did I know? What did any of us know? And then very quickly things became clear.
We were floored by it and couldn't really piece it together as exactly what happened. We came out onto the roof behind us, the roof of Mulry, and Brother Joe Griffin was already out here and he had binoculars.
A little after 9 a.m., I was on the steps of Shalou Hall with one of our fundraising consultants, watching the burning of the first tower, and all of a sudden we saw a massive explosion on the top of the second tower. And we looked at each other and said, did you see what I saw? And indeed, we compared notes, and it was a second plane that hit.
So I had the opportunity to come up onto the roof of Mulberry Hall, in fact, just a few feet away from where I'm sitting right now. And I just thought about how could that happen? And then I kind of looked south and I saw another plane traveling, in the sky. And I just said, well, that plane's not going to crash into the World Trade Center. It was a very strange thought. And then I came downstairs to see Father Tony Izzardo, whose office was right downstairs from here. And he had the television on, and in that moment, I saw the plane that I looked at in the sky crash into the other tower. And it's at that moment that I realized that something else is going on.
And then we knew that this was like a deliberate thing that was happening.
And I felt like I was in a surreal film. I saw traffic going on Grand Street, and people getting out of their cars and just looking behind them as if it was some sort of like King Kong film of some sort.
The rest of the day unfolded in just this surreal fashion.
It really did just feel like a day, like a school day, with this horrible thing going on in the background, and we would just catch these glimpses of it.
And we didn't know what happened. We didn't know who was responsible. It was all sorts of misinformation. So there was a desire to be clear with folks about what we knew, but there was also a desire to somehow not add to hysteria.
I remember going outside and seeing this tremendous amount of smoke blocking what we would call the $1 million view. What I didn't realize, though, was that the first tower had fallen.
All we could hear all day long, really, was sirens. And all we could see was smoke. I remember at recess hearing a rumor circulating out on the pretty new, at the time, Warren Street Plaza, that one of the towers had fallen down, and thinking, no, that's not possible, right? I mean, the smoke is just hiding it.
I walked to the curb where I saw some of my colleagues, and one being Pat Reedy, our vice principal at the time. And I remember saying, Pat, I just see one tower. And he says, because the other one just collapsed.
And then the next time we looked out, it was really just a sea of soot and smoke and dust and ash.
And then at lunchtime, I was sure when somebody said the other tower had fallen down, that no, we just couldn't see it because of the smoke.
He actually, on the third floor of the English building, felt the floor tremble. I run across the hall to Kaya DeWitt's classroom, where her students all ran to the window just to confirm that the second tower had collapsed. At that point, I do remember just crying on Jack Campion's shoulder, and it's still extremely emotional.
By about 10:30, both towers had fallen, and I couldn't believe it. I'd heard about it on the news, and I walked outside, and I just was so disoriented after the first tower had fallen and the second one was still standing. And then when the second one was gone, just saying, it's just unbelievable. And I couldn't fathom in the moment, and I just remember being numb for much of the day.
Incredibly, we didn't see overexcited individuals on campus, either the faculty and staff or the students. There was a calmness, but there was real sense of confusion. It was like being in a place that you'd never been in before. And culturally and I guess philosophically, that's what was going on that day.
Just this sense of feeling a little bit, unsafe in a way that I had never felt before.
And a painful day. Through the rest of the day, we remained in class. We decided we were going to continue teaching.
But going from class to class, I remember thinking about how human my teachers seemed that day. I mean, everybody kind of had a different reaction.
How am I going to face, these students? And I don't know if I can keep it together.
But we just moved forward, right? We didn't have the luxury of not moving forward, right? That wasn't an option.
I remember one period, I thought it was best to just teach, and I remember doing something about the first paragraph of an essay and what it should look like. And then the next period, I remember putting on the radio and listening to the news. I really didn't know what to do. The crazy thing about it, though, was that it seemed that our principal did know what to do.
And we went into response mode, right? How do we care for the students there? How do we make sure that they're safe? and safe not only physically. I got to admit, we didn't have, at least I didn't have physical worries that, St. Peter's Prep was going to be under attack, but right, how do you, clearly the world was being turned upside down, and so we wanted to be able to respond and care for kids, and by extension families, and hopefully faculty as well.
I had students saying, I'm fearful, my dad's there, my mom's there.
There were some students in there who were thinking about their parents who worked in that area, who didn't know, where they were, whether or not they were safe, and a lot of emotion around that. And myself thinking about my uncle who worked in downtown Manhattan, and not hearing from him, obviously, until much, much later that day.
The first concern were students whose parents work there, right? Because those were the guys who were, we're naturally going to be saying, like, what's happening to my world, what's happening to my mother and my father, and gathering those kids together. And I remember we had a big 50-plus kids in the lobby trying to say, okay, how do you make contact, right? Are you making contact with a parent at home? Are there other people you need to talk to? But just so they could make a family connection.
When I think of 9/11 at St. Peter's Prep, I really think of this idea of leadership in action. And that was from Jack. He was omnipresent. He was making PA announcements about what was happening. I remember crying with him. I remember hugging him. And I'll never forget what he did at the end of the day when he had a meeting of the faculty and staff, and he said, one light, one small light will always overcome the darkness. In his large-hearted way, he made us feel that we were going to get through this and that we were safe. And that amazed me. There was no training for that.
From a leadership end, it certainly was not just me. We had great support of the board, and Jim Keenan as president was just a model of all that is good and right about schools and caring for kids and being anchored in mission, and so many other folks, right? I mentioned Pat and Ken Dandorf and Jim Jiran and others.
Father Jim Keenan as president and Jack Kozlowski as principal did a wonderful job of communicating with faculty and staff, keeping everybody informed and calm.
How do you try to move through a day that's anything but normal with some sense of normalcy and regularity? We tried.
But we went from class to class through the day, and in retrospect, I'm very grateful for that. As an adult, I think back on, just how much as a teenager you need this sort of sense of being where you're supposed to be, and everything being at least a little bit stable, even in the midst of chaos.
I think rooted in a deep belief of the institution and the people, like, if we were going to get through this, that we were stronger doing this together, right? That kids were cared for, that there were adults that in the face of terrible events could remain calm. So there was a real belief in the institution, in the people of the institution, in the faith that brought the work to being. So never a sense of, we got to get kids out of here.
We tried to help out those that were, of course, then the ferry coming in from New York. They were all coming towards our direction.
It was really something out of a disaster movie, right? People would go any way to get out, even if it made no sense, right? Wrong way up a one-way street, cutting across a sidewalk. These were things I could see outside my office.
I also witnessed streams of people walking up Grand Street from the waterfront, and many of them after a while were covered in ash, and people were walking. They had no idea where they were and saying, where am I? Where am I? And I remember saying to people standing outside on Grand Street, you're in Jersey City, and where are we going?
For me personally, things really changed probably about 11 a.m. when the first of a few alumni started showing up on campus, dressed in their suits with their briefcases, but they were covered head to toe in a white dust. To the degree that it looked like they had walked through a dust storm. And this is not just hindsight, but they did look a little shell-shocked. It was evident that they had been through a very traumatic experience. They came here because this is a known entity, and they knew us very well, and they knew that they'd be welcome.
I also remember seeing parents coming in covered in this white soot, almost like, in a sense, almost like ghosts, and they were looking for their sons. And I remember a couple scenes where the son would just run up and grab their parent and squeeze them. And a part of me thought, okay, maybe we're going to get through this.
Other family members came to pick other guys up and wanted them home.
And then my dad came and picked me up early from school that day because he also worked in Jersey City.
There were also a lot of people who stayed, right, and tried to managing all that as well as we could.
And administratively, we started looking for, well, what do we do at 3 o'clock when the school day ends?
You know, that was not without its challenge because downtown Jersey City was a madhouse.
I don't think parents could get any closer to us than Ferris High School. And so then they were parking and then walking down. And if they were able to get their sons and take them home, they were.
We got through the day. I remember being in the old Burke Hall cafeteria downstairs, because unless our parents managed to get here, and it was no small feat to get here, unless our parents managed to get here to pick us up, we were supposed to be here, stay on campus until either our parents could get here or perhaps administration could know when we left, with whom we left, and where we were headed. Even then, even in the moment, and even being 16 years old, I remember being so impressed at the level-headedness and the calm that so many prep people were showing, especially Jack Wazlowski, who was our principal at the time, really making sure that we didn't make this bad situation worse by doing something rash like closing school in the middle of the day and sending everybody home.
But there are things right? You bring people together, right, so they can see the whole, right? We ended the day together, so we're not disparate, we're not wondering where folks are. We can see, well, there's strength in numbers, right? There's strength in community. So I think with the faculty, when we met that day, hopefully with the students, right, what we were providing were reminders of truth, right? Reminders of truth that is eternal, that is bigger than us, and right, a desire to really move that forward. So that's I'm sure that's what we were doing that day. I know that's what we try to do subsequently.
And I remember driving home that day. I had a number of students I was going to take home that day, and also John Dwyer, who lived in I believe Washington Heights at the time, and was going to meet his wife in Newark. She worked for the Star-Ledger, and so it was much easier for her to get to my house in Kearney than it would have been for her to get anywhere near Jersey City. So he stayed at my house then for a few hours. We ate together and just tried to make sense of the craziness of the day.
And I remember driving past the hospital, and there were folks outside waiting with stretchers, and no one was there. I remember speaking with my dad, who was a doctor at Bayonne Hospital, and he said he was ready for folks to come into the hospital so that he could, as best as he could, take care of them. And it was a very small number of folks who came. And I think it was one of the first times I realized that my dad was scared, and so was I.
It was in the evening, probably about 6 or 6:30. The students had found their way home with many faculty members driving them home. And I get in my car and I drove down by the Holland Tunnel to make a left at 280 West. And what struck me is that there was very little traffic, if any, coming out of the Holland Tunnel, number one. And number two, there were about 50 ambulances lined up. No sirens, but with their lights flashing right outside the Holland Tunnel, waiting to go in. And of course, they were waiting to go in and take survivors, and there were none. And the ambulances represented all over New Jersey. And it just put a coda on the day that, that event, as tragic as it was, it affected everybody. And you could just imagine the people that they were not going to have someone come home that night. And of course, I wonder if there's any prep people in that realm. And of course, we found out that there were.
And then there was that whole other parallel piece, right, of where were we as an institution in Jersey City with space to help meet other needs. And some of that was, can you house folks? Well, sure, we're going to house folks. And cots arrived. I think it was 28 people who found their way to us.
A number of us, I happen to live in the neighborhood, and a few other of my colleagues decided to remain at the school because a number of people who had been evacuated from Lower Manhattan didn't have anywhere to go, didn't have anywhere to go, couldn't return home. And so we decided, it was really Jack Roslowski, who was the principal, Father Jim Keenan, the president, and said, let's keep them here. Let's allow them to stay overnight. And amazingly, people from the neighborhood started showing up, people from the downtown neighborhood here in Jersey City.
No, you don't have to stay in the cafeteria, as nice as it was to be welcome to St. Peter's Prep, have a meal. And it was a sign of the community responding, right? They didn't know these people from Adam. We can give these folks a bed or a couch or, a family to hang out with or a meal.
One by one, most of the people who were in the cafeteria were brought home to the comforts of a local apartment. The Sisters of St. Joseph from St. Anne's Home came down, and they said, we heard you have people here. If there are any older people, they can come and stay with us.
I think for us as an institution, right, and it says something there, right, I don't think we've ever felt we had to do it all on any piece. We just got to do our part and do our part in our distinctive way, right, true to our mission, true to our charism, but then other people will do their parts.
And in the middle of that darkness, and just the goodness of people coming together here and taking care of people is something also that just reaffirms, I think, a faith in the goodness of people.
About a dozen people staying in school. We had them settled by 11-ish or so, and thank God for the old Flamingo Diner. May it rest in peace. A place of many a good meal during my prep days. Too many good meals. But it was about 11 o'clock that I walked over to eat there. It was Sue Baber, it was Jim D'Angelo. Those guys stayed with me. We bid adieu to Jim Keenan and Tony Zardo. Tony Zardo was bringing these endless snacks to folks, right, at night. I was back bright and early. Most of those folks were gone in a day or two.
I remember on September 12th, I really didn't know what to do. So I drove down to Prep because that's where I felt safe. And I remember walking to the waterfront, which is obviously a lot different looking than what it is now, and sitting on a bench and staring at the skyline.
I remember being home that Wednesday with nothing to do except to think back on the horrors that we had seen the day before and try to make sense of it, which nobody could do, and wishing that I could have something like a normal day.
I remember being really excited that we were coming back to school on September 13th. There was also a great sense of pride that we were going to try our best to continue our way of proceeding as a school and as best as we could as a country.
I remember being in discussions with the leadership of the school, with Jack Roslowski as principal and others, and saying probably the best thing that we can do is to get back into the routine and to continue the work that we began just on Monday with the beginning of the new school year.
2 days later, Thursday, September 13th, we were back here in class at Grandin Warren where we belonged. Only when I started college 2 years later did I find out that in other parts of the country, thousands of miles away, some people were out of school for the whole week or more, but not here. And we were going to be here for each other to get through this together.
It was, as I said, a belief in the institution, a belief in being grounded in the faith, a belief that we were better together, stronger together, and could move forward. And that, Mike, really drove us, coming back after one day, right? That some sense of normalcy and regularity are important in traumatic situations, and that was true. But even more so, the normalcy and regularity were grounded in a faith community, grounded in walking with a God who will not abandon us and will not desert us, and our walking together is somehow a witness to our faith and something that strengthens us. And that, I think, was really an overriding ethos to how we responded to things. And that was, that was Jim Keenan's belief, that was my belief, that was Pat Reedy's belief. I think that was the belief of the faculty.
Together, together, together. The strength of that idea played out on Thursday. It was 2 days after one of the worst tragedies in our history, and we're back in school. It was really important that we established our routines and that we were doing what we were supposed to be doing as teachers, as students, as coaches. We were back.
It was a bit surreal just knowing we were less than a mile away. I think it sent the right message to our students that we weren't going to let this impact what was important to us and what we thought was important to them, but still dealing with the tragedy of the lost lives.
Coming to school, having that resilience, I think, and our teachers kind of taking a moment and stopping what we were doing in our curriculum to address what was happening in the world and right here where we are, what we had all witnessed.
I can't, as I think back on it, I really can't oversell how grateful I was for the sense of normalcy.
We needed a few days, we needed some time to get back to be in the routine, to get back in the routine for the returning students and into the routine for freshmen.
When it comes to the students, the days after 9/11, of course, were filled with a lot of reflection, a lot of classes that didn't do much from the textbook or from the regular lesson plan, but just talking about what happened. And Father Tony Azzato telling me about one of the seniors who was a Muslim student who lived in New Jersey City Heights. And he was talking to Father Azzato, and Father asked him how he was doing. And he said, I couldn't wait to get back to St. Peter's Prep. He said, in the Heights, because I'm Muslim, there's a lot of animosity towards my family, towards others of the Muslim faith. At Prep, I knew I was with people that loved me, that cared for me, that accepted me for who I am. And I just thought, boy, that's a great example of what a Jesuit school is all about, particularly one in Hudson County in New Jersey City.
I learned so much from my dad. He was a funeral director. When you live above a funeral home, these are regular parts of the conversation, right? Where is God in the midst of loss and tragedy? Where is God in the midst of grief? How do people respond to their personal loss or the loss of others? So you draw on all these experiences to say, okay, difficult times, even very difficult times, we can do this. We can respond. We can walk with folks, and then you try to respond to needs.
Looking back, probably the most poignant memory I have occurred not on 9/11 itself, but a few days later. Got a call from Joe Mazzarelli, class of '80, former English department chair here at Prep, one of my former students. And he asked me if I was looking at the news on the previous night. And I said, of course I was. And he said, did you look at the posters that were up of missing people? And I said, I saw it, but what are you getting at? And he said, I think Tommy Sullivan from class of '80 was on that poster. So I did a little homework, and I found out that indeed he was missing. I had called his wife Deirdre, and she told me he was missing. It turned out that yes, he was a victim that day. So it was just very sad. A really good Prep alumnus was lost that day. And it turned out that he was one of 5 Prep alumni and 1 parent that we lost that day. Obviously other schools, including Xavier, et cetera, were hit much harder, but that was a tough day for us.
We began these prayer services in the lobby, right? Now, you used to love the lobby at that point because it was sort of a central place, right? So we gathered every morning for months to pray for peace, really anchored in a belief that God is with us, that God accompanies us, that God inspires us to move forward, to support one another, to create a more just world.
That helped to reinforce for me that this was more than just an event, but it was something that was going to be ongoing. And what was going to sustain us was our faith and our prayer to help us move through everything that we had no idea would unfold before us in those early days of the fall of 2001.
It was my 5th year teaching, and it was also my 5th year running the walkathon. And I remember speaking to the students and telling them that we were going to use the walkathon as a way to show that we were in this together, as a symbol of unity. I remember walking to Liberty State Park and coming back, and we had a carnival, literally on the corner of Grand and Warren. And there was an awful lot of joy and an awful lot of almost an innocence to it in the midst of what was happening in our world. I also remember before we began the walk, we sang God Bless America. There was a great sense of pride in being able to sing God Bless America with 800 young men and our faculty and staff. There was something special about that.
You know, but the art students, Pater Hellstrom did that mural. You may remember that mural. Pater came to me and said, well, the art students want to do something, right? And I think that was, how do we make meaning of this? It was this terrific tribute to remembering those who were lost, being in solidarity with those who were grieving, honoring first responders, celebrating strength of community, and I want to say at our best, the strength of the nation.
About a year later, actually it was a year later, it was the coming up on the first anniversary of 9/11. On the 10th of September, Prep had a memorial service in what was then St. Peter's Church right here, and then a candlelight procession from the church right around the corner to the corner of Warren and York Street to dedicate a plaque and a flagpole. That was Prep's 9/11 memorial. It was one of those days that, on a beautiful evening, very peaceful, just a couple of speeches, a couple of blessings, but it just was very important, I think, for Prep to do that, given that we were affected very directly by the incident.
There were those ongoing impacts in the community, yet a year later, with hope in the future, anchored in love, secure in our faith, right? We're there, and we are continuing the work. We're not resuming the work, right? We're continuing the work, right? When we were outside on that Wednesday commemorating the day, and in many ways it was another perfect day, right? But what does a perfect day look like when you're commemorating that loss and that tragedy? Here is the community together, having suffered loss, strong, but you don't forget that, right? You don't forget that. That was for me a sign of, okay, we're fine, right? We're fine. As the world changed, yes, but did this community endure? Did this community grow? Did this community give witness to what we say we are and what we hope to be? I think we did.